Hi, world history students. This lecture is going to be talking about how to approach college history. For many of you, this might be your very first college history class, or maybe you've had one or two before this, but it's always a good idea to think about what sets college history apart from other approaches to history. So we start with the question, what is history? And when I ask that question, the most common answer that I get is, well, history is a bunch of things that happened in the past. And to an extent, that's true. History is what happened in the past. But history goes deeper than that, because history is also a professional discipline. It's a career. It's something that people train for years to learn how to do. So what is it that sets the profession of history or the discipline of history apart? Why do people work so hard to learn how to do this? So that's going to be the topic for today's discussion, and I'm going to start by offering you a quote from the American Historical Association, which is the primary governing body for historians in the United States. So the AHA suggests that history is the study of the human past as it is constructed and interpreted with human artifacts, written evidence, and oral traditions. It requires empathy for historical actors, respect for interpretive debate, and the skillful use of an evolving set of practices and tools. So what this means is that history is a way of thinking about the past and approaching the past in critical and interpretive ways. So in other words, history is fundamentally about interpretation. It's rooted in argument, and that argument is based on evidence, and it requires that you be open to changing your mind about the past and what the past means when new evidence is brought to light. So history is about an ever-evolving set of knowledge that's constructed through dialogue, that's constructed when people make arguments about the past and talk to each other about the past. So history then is a set of skills and a way of thinking. So we're going to talk today about some of those historical thinking skills and what value they have for you both in this classroom and more broadly as you prepare for the future. So historical thinking is based on a few key principles. Number one is the idea that everything has a history. Or put another way, history is by its very nature interdisciplinary. Nothing in the world just poof pops into existence. Everything came from something else. It changed over time. From personal history to local history to case history to national or international history. Politics have a history, wars have histories, games have histories, science has a history, medicine has a history, you have a history. Everything has a history. And so what history fundamentally believes is that you can learn more about the world in which you live by studying where it came from. At whatever level, personal, local, national, international, you can learn more about the world in which you live by studying the past. The second key principle for historical thinking skills is something called historical empathy. And historical empathy is just a way of saying that historians judge the past, or they judge past cultures, by that culture's norms and standards and not by our own. The ability to study and understand the past from its own perspective and from its own set of rules and norms rather than from your own is essential to avoiding bias. It's essential to truly understanding what happened in the past. The third key principle for the study of history or for historical thinking skills is source analysis. The ability to read a source, whether primary or secondary, critically and analytically to understand what it means, how it can be interpreted, and what it suggests to us about the period in which it was created. Historians primarily use two types of sources. Primary sources are sources that were created in the past, in the period in question, and offer a first-hand account about the event or topic that you're studying. Secondary sources are sources that were not created in the period, but were written later, and offer an argument based on primary sources that try to get at the meaning of those sources for the past. This means that different historians can look at the same set of sources, the same set of primary sources, and come to different conclusions about what they mean. This conversation that historians have about the past based on argumentation, evidence-based argumentation. This conversation is sometimes called historiography. And historiography is just the way of historians figuring out the past through conversation, through dialogue. The fourth key principle for historical thinking skills will be a global geographic awareness. And that's just an awareness of the way that people and societies fit into the world in which they live geographically. These are concepts of spatial connections, trade, conquest, wars. These are all ways of humans fitting into geography. And historians understand that geography can define culture, that culture is defined as much by geography as geography is defined by the cultures that inhabit that geography. And the final key principle for historical thinking skills is effective communication and evidence-based argumentation. You've already heard me use the phrase evidence-based argumentation before, but this is the key to what professional historians do. They make arguments about the past. These arguments are, at their very core, interpretations of what the evidence means. And so they make these arguments, and in order to convince people that their interpretation is the correct interpretation or is a valuable interpretation, they use evidence. And that evidence kind of is organized in a way that supports the thesis or the argument that they're making. So when we think about historical argumentation, we're not really thinking about a bunch of people screaming at each other that they're right, but really about how effectively they can harness the primary sources and construct an argument about what the past means. So these are the 5 fundamental skills that serve as the basis of historical thinking, and they're skills that go well beyond history. You know, these are not just skills that are going to serve you in this classroom. They're skills that will serve you more broadly, whatever path you take down the road. The ability to think critically about sources, to develop empathy for other cultures, to understand the importance of geography, to communicate effectively. Those are skills that you can carry with you in the future. So those are the skills that we'll be working on in this class. So in college level history, we start or we help you start the process of learning to do history rather than just read or see history. You'll develop critical thinking skills, and those skills will serve you as you move forward. So what does that mean for you as you prepare to get started in this world history class? Number 1, you're going to be asked to operate at a higher level of thought. Traditionally in courses like this, cognitive thinking skills, or the way that you learn, is divided by an organizational pattern called Bloom's taxonomy. And you'll see from this image that Bloom's taxonomy is structured sort of like a pyramid or like a triangle. You have these base levels of remembering, understanding, and applying knowledge. And then on top of those, you build into analyzing, evaluating, and creating knowledge. These first 3 levels may seem more familiar to you. They are standard operating procedure for history classrooms across the educational spectrum, across the K-12 educational spectrum. And those first 3 levels are an important part of learning history. You can't make arguments about the past if you don't understand the basic narrative. So there will be some learning of the basic narrative or the story that makes up history. But we will be moving you into the upper 3 levels as well. These are the levels where you learn how to do history. So, takeaway number 1, you'll be operating at a higher level. Takeaway number 2, memorizing a bunch of names and dates and key events from a study guide isn't going to cut it. You're going to have to dig deeper and see the connections and make arguments about the way the past fits together and what it means for the present. Key study skills for college-level history include active reading, effective note-taking, time management, the ability to make connections between key events and ideas, and developing a process for planning, writing, and editing papers. We've offered videos for each of these, which I recommend that you take advantage of so that you can prepare for operating at this higher level. Number 3, as you study history, you're going to be running into multiple pasts. History is about interpretation, and historians don't agree, and that is okay. This is how we move the field forward. This is how we learn about the past. And so number 4, sometimes it's going to feel hard, sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, and that is okay. This is not easy stuff. You're learning something new, and no one learns how to do something new on the first try. But you have a long history of learning to do hard things. You have a long history of trying, failing, and then trying again. Learning how to walk, to talk, to ride a bike. These took time and effort, but you did it, and you will do this too. So seek out help from your professor, from your classmates, from the course resources available to you, and get into what Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset. Your ability to think historically is not fixed. It can be grown. It's just going to take a lot of work. Thank you.